Hello, so this will be our last video in this series of videos discussing intercultural interaction, communication, and conflict resolution. In this video, we will talk about the last cultural dimension, which is uncertainty avoidance. And then also we will talk about how individuals from different cultural backgrounds can interact together in order to resolve any sort of conflict that may arise from some misperception of cultural practices and cultural norms. Just to kick it off, so uncertainty avoidance. This is a very simple dimension. In some cultures, people are very happy to live with uncertainties, and in other cultures, people tend not to accept uncertainties. So a very good example is that if you work in the United States or Germany, you are almost always asked to come out with a very sort of detailed professional plan and a timeline for what you are asked to do. Now, in a place like Yemen, for example, that doesn't matter at all. And actually often, even when you're interacting with tribal leaders, if you are perceived as like a very sort of punctual person or timeline oriented person, they may dislike you because and accordingly, if you ask them to actually deliver certain things in specific times, they may feel a little uneasy. It's also similar to an extent in Egypt, where I come from. Often when you are talking to craftsmen or workers about a certain task, and you ask them when they would deliver, they would say it depends. If things go easy, maybe in 2 days, but it always depends on how things go. So people tend to be relaxed with uncertainty. And if the very same person from an uncertainty accepting culture goes to work in an uncertainty avoiding culture, they would probably be perceived as inefficient and even rude as well. So again, the advice here, if you come from an uncertainty avoiding culture and you work in an uncertainty accepting culture, you have to practice a little bit of patience and bear a little bit and try to get your point through and try to explain why certainty is important to you and how it reflects on the rest of your job and how it helps you to do other things because one plan leads to another. Then you'll have to learn how to be patient with individuals who are more accepting of uncertainty and may come to you as more laid back. And then the other way around, if you are from an uncertainty accepting culture and you go to an uncertainty avoiding culture, you really have to be more punctual and know that uncertainty might be perceived as rudeness. So now we are going to talk about conflict a little bit. So when we're talking about conflict that is based on different intercultural or different cultural perceptions, it's basically related to different cultural assumptions. And then if any could remember from the very first video, culture is about assumptions. So it's how assumptions manifest. So again, if I'm from a high context communication culture and I'm talking to someone from a low context communication culture, I'm assuming there that my high context communication method is polite and it's what the other person is going to like. And accordingly, I assume that this will open more channels with me and probably create a business conducive or inductive environment. Now, the way a person from a low context communication culture may perceive this, they may perceive this as a waste of time. If the high context communication individual is really taking the time and narrating lots of stories and lots of background information that are not relevant to the topic of discussion or negotiation there, so they may be actually perceived as being rude or insultive or not serious about their business. So again, this is to highlight here that assumptions are the main factor basically when it comes to the conflict that's based on misperception of different cultural behaviors or practices. Now, what are those assumptions? Now we're just going to identify or shed a little bit of light on how individuals from the different cultural backgrounds tend to go about negotiation. So again, we're talking about the individualistic and the collectivist, or the collectivist and individualist cultures. And as we have said earlier, a collectivist culture is the high context communication, large power distance culture. And again, to add to that, they're probably the ones that are more uncertainty accepting. And an individualist culture is the one that is low context communication, low power distance, uncertainty avoiding culture. So the one point I'm going to touch upon here, and I think it's really important, is that when it comes to a certain process of negotiation, a person from an individualist culture is outcome focused, and a person from a collectivist culture is process focused or process oriented. Now, what does that mean? Now, it could be very well the case that two parties are meeting to discuss or negotiate a certain topic. Let it be, let's say, access to a particular water well or water resource. Now, the party from a collectivist background will be more interested in how they're being welcomed and how they're being treated, and are they giving the due respect because they are the seniors of that group that are attending this negotiation. The group from the individualist cultural background would just want to get to the point. What's the cut? How much you get of that? How much I get of that? So it could be very well that before even engaging in negotiation, that both sides would agree. I mean, they both come into the negotiation with the same ideas, but just because the way the collectivist group was received was not deemed proper by them or irrespective, they might just shut down the whole thing, and actually that would create a conflict. So it's very important here to talk about why they are process oriented, and then a big part of this process orientation is actually one thing known as face making. A very good example, in one country I was working for, and then often when you're working there, you have to make sure that you have a good relation with the tribes that are the dominant tribes in a particular area. And just because I managed to make one tribal chief to look good in front of his tribe members, meaning that he was able to invite them for a nice lunch and offer them a lot of food, he then became a very good counterpart or cooperator with my organization at the time. So this shows how the process orientation for collectivist individuals is very important. And then even they may change their mind about a particular target they had in mind before, if they see that they're being treated nice enough and they are being respected well enough. So again, how does this reflect? So an individualist person would, in a negotiation, would have more emphasis on factual details, so plans, timelines, numbers. The collectivist person would be more about holistic pictures. How would this look in the long run, and historically what happened, and how would this look to the whole country and the nation and the honor and all that stuff. Individualist would be content oriented, collectivist will be relational oriented. So how good is the relation between them and their negotiation counterpart. So that is to say, for an individualist, when they are entering a negotiation process with a collectivist, they need to make face, respect, show hospitality, and don't get annoyed with many off-topic sort of discussions and historical discussions and other discussions about the honor and the status of the tribe or the person and so on. And they should try to validate that as much as possible. For a collectivist person, they should try to get more to the point, provide more details, more number, more logical arguments, and more logical discussions that basically lead to tangible facts. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about here is dialogue. So again, we're going to briefly go over what we said. So individualists, what they want to do, and again, individualists are the ones from low context communication background, and if they are engaging in negotiation or discussion with a collectivist group, well, they want to practice patience, as they said, and then also be open to the expression of stories, proverbs, metaphors, analogies, and understatements. use self-effacing questions to encourage the other, or to coach, or to show them the way. So this is very important, because often if you come from an individualist culture and you work in a collectivist cultural setting, you'll see that many of your colleagues there would know a lot of information that are very relevant to your operation. They just won't let it out. So you need to learn how to ask the relevant questions, how to help them basically say what they know, and help them say it in a well-framed, sort of factual manner. And then that will happen as long as you show them respect and that they're being treated well, and the face-making bit, that is very important. Now, on the other hand, the collectivists, what they want to do is they should be a little bit more verbal. So they should practice verbal assertiveness, knowing that the individualist, being a person of a low context communication background, would often miss out on reading the whole context. So the timing, the nuances, the setup in which a message is being conveyed, as we said earlier. So they should try to use more direct verbal responses to indicate agreements. For instance, often in a high context communication culture, silence could be perceived as refusal or acceptance, really depending on the setup and who is doing that. So they should, and that is very difficult for a person from an individualist, low context communication background to read. So collectivists should try to practice more verbal assertiveness. They should use direct, specific questions as well to cross-check facts. So they explain something, and maybe they just did that in a very high context manner, they could really ask the other party if they got the point, or they can ask them, so what did you understand, or what do you think I said? And then when the low context communication person or individual would answer, then they can make sure that their point got across correctly. So again, they should learn to engage in overlap talks, faster turn talks. They normally tend to have to take a very long time in talking and telling historical stories and going a little bit off topic. So they should try to shorten that a little bit, because then the others would get impatient and maybe view it as a waste of time, which is not very liked basically in individualist culture, given that punctuality is one of the factors they use to interpret trust, actually, or build confidence in a person. So if you waste a lot of time, you might not be trusted. If you come from a collectivist background and you think it's okay to do that with a group from an individualist background. You would use perception check questions just to make sure that your point got across correctly. So that was briefly, that was saying it very briefly, how both sides could interact together to avoid conflict or resolve conflict that is arising from cultural misperceptions. Of course, it can be discussed in more details, and there are more examples to be shared. And this was our final video. Please feel free to type any of your questions in the comments, and as much as I can, I will try to attend to those and answer them to my best capacity. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this series of videos beneficial and useful.